does this session end? Just so we keep our
We have
time.
an hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
Yeah.
So it ends at 10?
10, yeah.
All right. Sweet. Testing.
Testing. Okay.
Morning, everyone. Are you guys awake? Can I get a seal of approval? Little fun for the morning. Yes, I did originally come out of the ocean world. So today we wanted to be a little more informal. This is going to be a workshop, so interactive. We want to hear your opinions and your thoughts and your processes. But we're going to present something in a way that this is kind of a problem that comes to Scott and I pretty much every other week.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll kind of walk through how we see things and how we kind of work out the problem, but we're going to have you interact with us in working out these problems.
Yep.
Yep.
Let's get started.
We need the little clicker.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the first thing is we're going to talk a little bit about why there's so much importance in project planning, especially at the beginning of a development. A lot of times as developers, we get very excited about what we're doing, we jump into it, and we forget the pre-planning process. And the pre-development process is every bit as important as getting to where you're operational. I usually, in pre-development process, put 2 years into pre-development planning stages. Most developments cost anywhere from $2 to $4 million in pre-development stages. So that's just part of my budget when I budget out a project. Then we're going to give you a project scenario, and we'll go through some of the pros and cons of technology choices. And then we're going to go through the key project development steps, and then we'll leave it open for Q&A and anything you guys want to throw at us.
Yep. And as we go through the project scenario, we've handed out some sheets. And so we're going to kind of, as a group, evaluate certain aspects of the project to make the decisions of what the project should look like. So that's kind of the interactive part of this.
Mm-hmm.
So is anyone familiar with the Swiss cheese model? This is, I believe it was originally developed for process safety. And I've seen it in the process safety arena many, many times. And the concept is on the left you have threats, and on the right, the threats are the red arrows, and if a red arrow makes it to the right side of the page, then you have an incident, right? So in order to prevent an incident, you set up layers of protection, and the layers of protection are never perfect, so they're kind of like Swiss cheese, they have holes in them. And the better you are at your layers of protection, the smaller those holes are and the farther they are apart. And so in process safety, you have an engineering layer to make sure you design your project correctly and you put the proper safety systems in. Then you have an administrative layer to put the policies and procedures in place to make sure it's safely operated. And then you have a human layer to make sure that the people are trained on the procedures and they wear their PPE and all that kind of stuff. And so we were kind of riffing a couple weeks ago before a conference and said, what if you put together a Swiss cheese model for project development? So instead of safety risks on the left, you have project risks. So those red arrows, if they make it to the left, your project is unsuccessful, or if they make it to the right, your project is unsuccessful. So what pieces of Swiss cheese would you put in between to keep those risks from sinking your project? And so we put our heads together and we figured the first one would probably still be technology and engineering. You want to make sure you choose the right technology. You want to make sure you do the proper process integration, and you want to make sure that your feedstock spec matches your technology and your technology matches your offtake spec, things like that.
Yeah. And that matches up with ISO 9001 protocols. So one of, I think, the most useful documents we do for companies are risk assessments. And risk assessments are a living document. They don't just die after you've made them. So they continue on with your company. They're part of your auditing process. You update them as you mitigate your risks. And I think they're a really useful document for companies.
Absolutely, and that's actually a great point because these Swiss cheese layers, these layers of protection, are not check boxes. You don't do the engineering, check that box, and then move on. You're continually going back to your engineering, your contracts, your financiers. So this process takes place from day one until actually even beyond operations.
Yeah. And they become part of your engineering core documentation. You have dates on the updates. You see all the variations of it. And you see where you've made improvements in your plans and where you still have improvements to go.
Yep.
All right.
So then the next layer would be project development. We label it project development, but this is really where you put your contracts together. So you have all of your you've done your engineering. Now you kind of have to paper that up legally. So you could put together your feedstock contract, offtake contract, make sure those are good. You get your permission from the state, the federal government. You get your permits to build a project. You have to know your market and understand. This is where you start looking at project insurance as well. So this is basically putting together what we call a finance package. You're getting all your ducks in a row so that someone will actually lend money to your project.
Yeah.
Then after that, in order to build a project, you need to get it financed, you need to get it funded, so you go out for project finance.
Yeah. And that's including a data room. And so your data room is pretty comprehensive, but if it's too comprehensive, it's too much. So you have to be very specific about what goes into your data room and how people have access to that data room, because it's also very sensitive information. So we've seen a lot of data rooms that are just a mess, and financiers take one look at it and go, oh no, I'm not going in there.
And you usually don't get a second chance.
No, you never get a second chance.
And so once you get all the money in the bank, once you get your project funded, you have to execute. You still have to build it, start it up, commission it, and move into operations. And that's, as we know, that's no trivial task. So that's where your layer of protection there is a solid management team. It's good program management, and again, it's continually updating risks. We talk about project risks. We talk about market risk, we talk about technology risk. As you're building the project, and especially during startup and commissioning, so many new risks pop up, and it's a very frantic time. And that's when you really need to be very diligent about still evaluating, taking the time to evaluate those risks and document them so that you don't forget that, oh, we put this Band-Aid on the project to get the test done, and then during operations, that Band-Aid falls off.
All right. So here's the problem. And surprisingly, this problem comes to us a lot. You have a community, and they have they're looking and requesting an MSW facility to deal with their waste, and they produce about 1,000 tons a day. So that's like a medium-sized community, something like a Santa Barbara, California, something like that. Currently, they have filled their landfill, so they have no choice but to transport their waste outside of their county. And it's really, really expensive. So they're trucking their trash over 100 miles away. We see this starting to happen all over the United States in different places. You look at Chicago. Chicago is transporting all of their waste out of the city over 100 miles away. So you think about that volume, and it tells you a lot of what's going on in the world. Many cities are close to their landfills being completely full. So they are under stress, they don't know what to do, and this is a new arena for them. So they're paying not only the trucking for this, but they're paying $150 a ton for tipping fees. So they are just getting reamed. So this community, just to get rid of their waste, is paying over $55 million a year just to deal with the waste. So they came to you and they said, help us. So this is where we start.
And as good consultants, we did not say no.
So the first thing we're going to look at is different types of output that we're going to look at. So we're going to look at electricity as a product, RNG, fuels, and hydrogen, which are kind of some of the main classes of things that we see. And then we're going to go through what are the pros and cons of each of those things. So the first thing I kind of want you guys to think about is, what do you think the average gross margin of each of those offtake types is? And kind of just write it down on your sheet. Just think about it. There's no wrong answers.
Yep. And think about how they rank in relation to each other as well.
Mm-hmm.
And before we get too far into this, just so I don't have to caveat every single thing I say, there are certainly times when what we're going to talk about is that there are niche projects where electricity may be way more valuable than hydrogen. But we're going to talk in generalities today. We're going to talk in generalities about markets and technologies. So that'll keep me from caveating everything that comes out of my mouth.
No, that's completely true. And as many as you know, when things are, no technology is the same. They're all completely different. You can have the same technology side by side that has the same exact name with similar outputs, and they're 150 degrees from each other. They're completely different. So, all right. You guys have some answers down on your paper? You ready to move on? Shall we give them
Yeah,
the
so,
answers?
so Andrea and I pre-filled these out. We put our heads together and came up with our answers.
Yeah. So out of the many, many performas and projects that we've looked at together, this is about the average of what we see. Electricity has pretty low gross margins, usually around 20%. RNG, usually closer to like 30% gross margins. Fuel products are where you get a really good bang for your buck. And hydrogen is super volatile. It can be very, very low, or it could be very, very high.
Yeah, the markets for electricity, natural gas, and fuels are pretty well developed, and so you kind of know what you're getting into. With hydrogen, it's like the Wild West when it comes to the hydrogen market. It really depends on who you know. If you can find someone who needs hydrogen and is willing to pay a premium for low CI score hydrogen, you could make a really good gross margin. If you don't, your gross margins will probably suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mentioned this yesterday. Imperial County, our electricity is 19 cents here in San Diego. It starts at 28, 55 cents. So how do you get that?
That comes down to project siting. I mean, if you know an area where you can get 50 plus cents per kilowatt hour, I mean, you want to look at siting your project in that area.
Yeah, but just like in the water industry, you can wheel. So you don't necessarily are stuck with the market that you're in with electricity. Are you guys familiar with wheeling, or the concept of wheeling? So in the water industry space and also in the electricity industry space, you can produce your product in one place and sell it to, say, the main utility that's working on it, and they will distribute it differently depending on who they also have contracts with. So say I'm in Imperial County, and I'm working with them and producing water for them, and they have the lowest cost of water in the entire California region. So they're going to buy from me at a very low rate because they have a low rate, and then they're going to sell back to Santa Barbara at like a rate they're going to purchase their water at like $150 to $200 an acre foot. Then they're going to turn around and sell it to Santa Barbara for probably $900 an acre foot. So it really, you can wheel these aspects around. They're not really just directly where you are. But there's cost to that because you're doing business. So every touch that you have, every degree of separation, you're going to lose a little bit on your overall profits. Okay. Any more questions about gross margins here? All right. So the next thing that we're looking at is technical difficulty. And I think we can move on.
Well, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the technical difficulty side, we wanted you to kind of take a look and think about, is this easy? Is it difficult? Is it moderately technical difficult to do? So this goes into that decision-making process too. So go ahead and write your answers down.
Does anybody have any initial thoughts on technical difficulty of the various options? Sure.
If you're going to have that very high percentage of fuel, that has to be the easiest one and work. Oh, sorry. That would have to be the easiest one you have already worked out. You have a lot of different options. There's a lot more things on the market. So technical difficulty for fuel, that would be the easiest.
So we're talking the technical difficulty of the technology producing the product. So we're taking MSW and we're trying to make electricity versus RNG versus fuel. And so how, from a nuts and bolts perspective, how technically difficult is that? That's what this is. That's what we're getting at here.
That would be harder.
Yep.
I'll let someone else answer that.
Yeah. No. Thanks for the clarification. Does anybody have any ideas? What's the low-hanging fruit?
Tricky. I mean, fuels gets really tricky because you typically have to team up with some sort of petchems or something like that. I mean, unless you're using RNG as a fuel. I mean, in which case, I guess you could do that. I mean, or LNG, I guess it's more appropriate. So, yeah, hydrogen, I just think is a crapshoot either way, and pretty tough to. And electricity, you have to find an offtake partner, and I think that would be helpful to reducing some of the costs. But that's just me, so I don't know.
Yeah. So again, we're not thinking offtake. We're just thinking technically.
Yeah, technical.
Yeah.
But I think technically, to create a fuel, it's pretty technical. I mean, I just
It
see.
is. It is.
It's just very difficult. As a matter of fact, even the presentations today, or the last couple of days, show that it's really challenging to get to a fuel level and the quality. And a lot of refineries won't take it anyway.
Yep.
So you have to do bunker fuel, or, you know, that depends. But I think you're talking fuels like to trucks or something
Yeah,
like
drop-in
that.
transportation fuels.
Yep, okay,
Yep.
all right, okay. That's all I got.
Yep. Any other thoughts?
I don't know anything about these four fields, but just initially my thoughts would be technically I would think the electricity is probably the quote-unquote easiest to do. It's quite proven across the world, you know, doing waste energy. You're simply, again, quote-unquote, simply
Yep.
burning the trash to make electricity. I would think that technically, just from a straight technical perspective, that one's probably the easiest to do. That's my thought.
Yep.
Yep.
Should we give them the answers?
Sure.
All right.
And so I like your air quotes, because we don't think any of it's technically easy, right? So we started with moderate.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at waste energy projects around the world, the majority of them today are just burn it and make electricity. So that's probably the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, and you guys are completely correct that making specifications for your offtake is complicated. So even if you're making a fuel product, it doesn't mean you're making a fuel product you can sell.
Yep.
What's the difference between hard and difficult? Question was, what's the difference between hard and difficult?
Oh, difficult is worse than hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Yeah.
Like your offtake contracts for your fuels are very specific about your fuel profiles. And if you do not meet those specifications, you do not make your sale. So, and it is easy if you have anything go wrong in your batch for you not make your specification. So even if your technology meets the specification when you're doing all your pre-development trials, in operation, there is a high degree of failure. So those are just things to think about. You probably aren't going to be selling 100% of what you make.
And so, from a technical aspect, like RNG, you take your syngas and you put it through a methanation unit, and you make natural gas, you make methane. And so, if you go to people like Halter Topsoe, they'll design and sell you a methanation unit. And there are many of those in operation around the world. Maybe not necessarily from MSW, but from hydrogen and carbon monoxide. But so that's why it's hard, because it's not like electricity plants; they're not everywhere. But it's being done in a similar fashion around the world. And as far as fuels, you really have a couple options. One, you would take your syngas to alcohol, and then alcohol to like a jet fuel, or you would do a Fischer-Tropsch process. And outside of Sasol in South Africa, not many people have been able to crack that Fischer-Tropsch nut. That was, we talked about Fulcrum yesterday. That's what they were trying to do, MSW, to drop in diesel. And the Fischer-Tropsch process, while there are many companies that'll tell you they can design you one and they'll build you one, they haven't done it yet on a commercial scale. And so that's really why we said that was difficult.
Yeah, and the hydrogen depends on the process train, because there's variations on easiness to difficulty, and a lot of it also depends on the efficiencies of what your turnover is on the product.
Yeah. So with hydrogen from syngas, syngas is hydrogen and carbon monoxide, and there's a water gas shift reaction. You can catalytically react carbon monoxide with water to get carbon dioxide and hydrogen. It's called shifting the syngas to hydrogen. And depending on the process, depending on the gasification technology, these gasification technologies can make a wide variety of hydrogen to CO ratios in their syngas just the way the technology works. So one technology you might be starting with a 0.2 H2 to CO ratio, and another one you might be starting with a 0.8. And so it really depends on the gasification technology as to the ease of shifting it all to hydrogen.
Yeah. And there's other things you can add in there, like nanoresonance and stuff,
Yep.
to like help with the cleaving process, but that gets even more out into the maybe.
Yeah, that's not yet commercially technology proven, I would say.
Not for that.
Yeah.
Just to add a little detail to how it really varies on regional and location. RNG, we're talking MSW here, so that's one way, and that's quite complicated. But actually, RNG has been really deployed from the ag feedstocks from anaerobic digestion point of view. Anyways, where I'm going on location here, we had a project where because the offtake, their requirements, they wanted so little hydrogen in the back end that we had to put, or at least design for, a cryogenic cleaning in the back to get the carbon monoxide and hydrogen low enough on our product, where in other districts it would have been much easier. So it's where there's a lot of variation depending on where your project is located. For your offtake, fuels are a little simpler because they're kind of universally accepted. Well, fuels are more consistent, not simpler.
Yeah.
Just to add a little detail, your location, your offtake has a lot to do with how hard this will be to achieve.
Move on. So storage and costs. So in this, we're kind of looking at the same kind of rating for things on the storage and costs. So how much money do you think the storage for these types of products is going to cost you to store it? Because you're not going to be just shipping it out right away. Very often you have to store it on site. And how easy is it to store these products? And it's the same kind of rating: moderate, hard, difficult. And the cost is money signs. How many money signs do you think it takes?
Any thoughts on this one? What are we going to tell our client?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, battery storage, it's really tricky. And they're still trying to prove that. And yeah, it's just, so I would call that maybe moderate. I don't know. Yeah, and then the rest would be hard, or no, and then RNG, I think it'd be easy, and then difficult for hydrogen. That's what I'd say, so.
Okay. Well, shall we?
Sure.
We'll reveal for you guys. So this is what we thought on average, but you're right, it is very dependent on project to project or type of things. Yep, we have there. So electricity in general, storage and costs is fairly moderate, and we'll go into some of the delivery processes a little bit later on this chart of why that is. For RNG, it can be very hard because the infrastructure for delivery of it can be very difficult to produce. Takes a ton of engineering. So while the transport vessels may be there, you still have to get the product to the transport vessels. And that's not an easy trick.
If you're talking about liquid fuels, how come you have a moderate sort of $2 sign thing? That is off-the-shelf, straightforward stuff.
Yeah, most like bunkers and things, you can buy them
Okay.
off the shelf. It's pretty straightforward. The permitting's straightforward. It's really just not quite as difficult on an infrastructure build as the RNG infrastructure is.
So why wouldn't you put that as a single dollar sign? I mean,
Oh,
it's
you're
not
saying
moderate, it's
you're
easy.
saying it should be easy.
It's very easy.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. I guess when we approached this, we said nothing is actually cheap and easy.
But storing liquid
So
fuels.
spoiler
Storing
alert.
liquid fuels is the cheap of all.
Of all,
these
it is the
Of all of
cheapest.
these,
That's
yes.
true. That's
Yeah.
true. That's a good point.
things.
Yeah.
All right. So.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. There's a lot of different choices. There's a lot of providers. It's doing business as usual, so.
And you can actually get it permitted pretty quickly, which
Mhm.
is sort of the bellwether for how hard things are, is the permitting
Yeah.
process.
And hydrogen, we felt, was the most difficult. It really depends on your compression of your product, and it's difficult to store, so that was one we thought was a really difficult one.
Yeah, there's really two, if you're looking at storing hydrogen and or shipping it, there's really two options. One is as very highly compressed gas, like 5 to 10,000 PSI, or as a liquid, where you have to cryogenically take it down to like minus 450 degrees C. The compression is actually the cheaper of the two, but it's still very expensive. I worked on a project where it was a woody biomass to hydrogen project, and they initially were going to put it in a pipeline. And then the off-taker said, well, no, we want a cryogenic product delivered to us. And that basically consumes 30% of the hydrogen product as energy. So it's a big cost.
Yeah. So the next one we're going to tackle is average offtake contract timeline. And a lot of people don't put this into their decision tree when they're putting together a project plan. And they think, oh, I'm just going to go to this person and I'm going to get an offtake contract. They don't realize that sometimes these things take a long time to put together. So guess how many months each of these take on average to get an offtake contract?
Any thoughts on what would be the shortest or longest? For which one?
California, hydrogen, available, about 12 years. If it's under $60 a ton.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you are correct on the electricity. Most public utilities take 18 to 24 months to develop an offtake contract. They are a long process. RNG is one of the easiest to market right now. You can quickly offtake that. There's a number of companies currently looking for RNG products. Fuels sounds like it would be simple, but because they're major companies and they have high profiles, you go through a process with them. So it's not just an offtake contract. You have to meet their specifications, and often they want you to produce the product for them to test in their laboratories. This is a long process. My last offtake contract with a major Fortune 100 took 12 months. And I think we sent them six samples for them to test before they were satisfied. So it takes time.
Okay.
Yeah. And then with hydrogen, you're completely correct. Hydrogen, if it's priced right and if there's a market there, it could be sold right away, but it can also never be sold. So
So that's an interesting comment, Andrea, because in the fuels market, I'm selling pie oil, which
Yeah.
still has to meet a spec, but not an SAF or any other kind of a spec. So it's a 30 months because the Fortune 100 or sometimes Fortune 10 companies take a long time. So it's not us. We were very nimble. For them, even though it was a desirable product, they're just very slow.
Yeah.
I don't care which one you're talking about, they're all slow.
Yeah.
So I would suspect fuels direct to transportation versus ours, which is refinery feedstock only, just depends on their interest as well as to how fast they want to move, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think there's an aspect there of it's kind of like a new product to them, and there was some internal evaluation going on at the same
Absolutely,
time? Yeah.
without question,
Because I
yes.
mean, if you're talking about SAF, that's something that the industry understands, and as long as it meets the spec, I can imagine that's probably a lot easier.
And they were developing the spec for pie oil as we were providing them with
Yeah.
the data for that,
Yeah.
so. And it's changing.
Yeah. And so so hopefully the more pile projects we see, the shorter that time frame should get in
Yep.
theory, right?
Yeah.
And part of what took us a long time was we just couldn't make the spec perfectly. It wasn't technically possible. So they were debating on whether they could integrate it into their bunkers of what they had or not, and whether they would mix well. And they have a much higher risk if things fail. So they're really slow. Okay, so next one is delivery of your product to your customer. What do you think the delivery types are for these types of products? So is it going to be by rail? Is it going to be by truck? Is it going to be by pipeline? What do you think? And each of these have costs. So when we do our development, we think about, all right, where am I going to place my site? If all of a sudden you can only truck your product out, you are limited on your pricing. Rail can often be a lot better. You know, I agree with you. I wasn't going to tell everyone my secret sauce, but yes, I agree with you that having rail and having a rail spur on your site is a high priority. Mm-hmm. No, so I have made a lot of partnerships with logistics companies and with railroads and railroad owners specifically because of that. Yep. All right. Any thoughts on this, or should we reveal the answers? Yeah. Okay. Oh. So electricity, one of the things that gets difficult is you're going to need a substation. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, generally, if you're selling to a utility, you need to go through their interconnection process, and you need to get a substation built. It's not reinventing the wheel. However, it is a lengthy process, and it's not always inexpensive. I'll say that.
Yeah. If you're doing RNG, depending whether it's liquid or whether it's in a gaseous form, there's different ways of doing it, but pipeline or truck or rail, or ship if you're in a port arena. But once again, it's delivering to how you're going to get it to that vessel that's going to take it where it's going. And then fuel's probably one of the most simplest to move around because it's done all the time, truck, rail, vessel. And the hydrogen, it gets tricky. As always, it depends on your compression. Depends on how you're going to do your delivery. And compression's expensive.
Yep. Cryogenic's even more expensive.
But trucks are expensive too. So you've got some choices to make on where you're going to put your bang for your buck. Yep. All right. So the next one that we're going to look at is, oh, go ahead.
Just add a little foresight to hydrogen. PG&E, CPUC in California are approaching the end of their studies to allow up to 5% hydrogen in the pipeline. So we're talking about current numbers. This is all accurate, but that's where things are likely moving. The question is, how much will that be limited, and what do you then do? Can you separate the hydrogen back out, or will it? That's where it gets into the business side. How do you even claim that? But just some heads up on that.
Yep, absolutely. So the next thing we're going to do is market, and on this we're not looking at market size. We want to see like how good is the market right now? How easy is it going to be to sell your product into that market? So do you think it's going to be steady? Do you think it's going to, be a really hot market? What do you guys think about each of those products?
Any thoughts on what the hottest market would be right now?
Should we
Yep.
reveal? All right. So electricity is a super steady market. You're always going to be able to enter into it. There's no lack of need for it. It's just a very steady market. It just takes some time to create the offtake contracts. RNG right now is hot. Basically, everybody in my list that works in the fuel industry that's looking for things is looking for RNG. So if you got it, it's hot. People want it. Fuel's pretty steady across the board. Yes, SAF is a hot topic for a lot of commercial airlines and things that are looking for that. But overall, fuel products in general are just a really steady market, and you're pretty assured on the growth of that market and the pricing. Hydrogen is so dependent on government support. It just really is. And so I think one of the problems with hydrogen and why I personally haven't gone into hydrogen on projects, even if there's been incentives, it just didn't even know where I was going to sell it, to be honest.
Yeah. You almost need someone saying, hey, I want hydrogen before you develop a hydrogen project today.
Yeah.
And as I'm thinking through this, this might be a good place to introduce carbon intensity, because I mean the difference between power and green power, renewable natural gas and natural gas, and SAF and regular aviation fuel. I mean, right now there is there's a high premium in price and a very large increase in demand if your product has a low CI score, low carbon intensity score.
So the last one we're going to approach is how much energy do you think that each of these takes to produce? Because there's a cost to producing them. They don't just get made. So. See, Michael's having fun with this.
Any thoughts? What are some of the less energy intensive and more energy intensive products?
There we go. So yeah, you're really quite correct on that. Electricity is minimal. RNG is moderate. So each of these we're kind of taking in consideration. We're going to parasitize a little bit of our load to help supplement the energy costs on it. Fuels can be very high. And they do need, if you're going to self-sustain that product, you have parasitation of your load. Because if you don't, it just becomes cost prohibitive on the energy side. And hydrogen, moderate to high, also depending on process and compression and everything else. If you have a tremendous amount of compression, reducing your transportation costs, it's a high energy cost to doing that.
Yeah, so I mean, electricity is the most straightforward. You kind of burn the syngas and make power. There is, power plants do have a parasitic load. When it comes to RNG and fuels, those are exothermic processes, so you get a little bit of energy back and waste heat, but they're still, you still need, pumps, compressors, you still need to heat up. Oftentimes you need to heat up your syngas in order to make those products. So those products require catalytic reactors, so your syngas needs to be clean, and unfortunately, a lot of times you have to cool your syngas down to clean it, and then reheat it back up to do those type of reactions. So it's thermodynamically, it's kind of a bummer, but that can lead to higher parasitic loads. And then hydrogen. Hydrogen, again, it depends on the process train. The shift reaction is a catalytic reaction, but you need to add steam, and so you need energy to make steam. And so if you start with a low H2CO ratio, your energy requirements are much higher than if you start with a high H2CO ratio.
And some of the decisions that go into this is where your site is. So do you have connection to utilities? And you may not have that connection to utilities, or you may not have the allocation that you need for that utility. We didn't talk about water, but also there's water consumption that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yep.
All right. So now we're getting in, oh, yeah. Did you want us to go back?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
And maybe you're going to get to this. So in the context of the original premise, which was, I think, 1,000 tons a day, $55 million per year to address, at that scale, do any of these make sense? Are you going to address that?
Yeah,
Okay.
so we decided from that, and I guess I went a little ahead, but we decided from our perspective that the best way to go is to have MSW to a MRF for sorting, and taking the high-value products out and reselling those, and then going to RNG.
I see. Okay. And that would work at that scale? You think that everything would sort of pass financial muster?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Some of the considerations is the scale, because we have to go with fairly proven technologies that have been at that kind of scale. In fuel industry, it's not really that prevalent going to fuels from MSW.
Yeah, as we all know, people have tried that, and so far no one's been very successful.
But there's a number of projects in operation for a long time, taking MSW to RNG. So, yep. All
Yes.
right, so one of the first things you have to think about is your technology choice and your EPC provider.
Yeah, so Yeah, the first bullet there says many promises without substance. As I talked about yesterday, my company has a database of over 250 technologies that convert solid carbonaceous feedstock into syngas. And I'll be honest with you, there's a lot at the top, many of the ones I talked about yesterday that are, have commercially operating plants or have demonstration plants. There's a lot at the bottom that are kind of bench scales in people's garages that are likely probably defunct already. And there's a lot in the middle. And so I have one of my favorite clients will bounce ideas off of me every once in a while, and he'll say, hey, can I get your idea on this gasification technology? We'll sign a quick NDA and spend an hour looking at it, give me your initial thoughts. And oftentimes my initial thoughts are, hey, yeah, this actually looks good. I look at the database and it's, yeah, what they're saying is well within, reality. Sometimes I'll say, hey, this is, more efficient or better than what I've seen before. It's intriguing, they're doing something different. And then other times I'll say, this literally breaks the laws of thermodynamics. You should probably walk away. And so you really need to do that diligence on your technology. That is, will it work? Is it feasible? And then you have to look at your project-specific technology and say, okay, now maybe the gasifier works, but is it the right gasifier for MSW to RNG? And so that's another diligence on technology, and that's where you have to really understand not only the feedstock, but the downstream processes. So, I mean, there's a handful of gasifiers that can do MSW, but they're not all well suited to RNG because, again, that's a catalytic process. And a lot of especially with MSW, a lot of the contaminants can poison catalysts, and you have to make sure that you're not going to do that. That's a very expensive proposition to poison a catalyst.
Yeah. Now, the market for financing has changed the last couple of years, and mainly because of so many failures. So banks, traditional financiers are nervous Nellies. They do not like risk. So the last finance packages that we've worked on, some of the requests from the banks and the financiers have been, this has to be in operation for a significant amount of time and has to be very well understood and industrialized. Not great when you're starting new technologies, but there are tricks around it. So one, of course, is doing traditional capital raises and going through the angel investment round and making sure that you get your project up at a certain size and then daisy chaining it. So not necessarily increasing the size of your facility so quickly. Others and other ways to do it happen to be if you can develop out insurability of your technology. That's one way to kind of get around the risk for investors. Another way is to plan and stage. So maybe use something that is really known in your first stage so you get a facility up and operating and you're making money, and start integrating some of the new into that as you go as part of your stage plan. And there's a number of companies, Scott works with a ton of them, that you could start up those and get the documents ready to go pretty readily to get the financing in, then integrate some of the new into it with the really well-established.
Yep.
Yeah. Import versus export.
Oh, I'm sorry, can we
Yeah.
scale up?
Yeah, we can scale up.
Yeah, so conservative scale up. And years, 3, 4, 5 years ago when we would see projects, we would oftentimes, especially in the gasification arena, see 5, 10 times scale up factors. And so there would be a big evaluation as to, okay, how is this going to scale up? Is it going to work? Generally speaking, chemical industry, a 5 to 10x scale up is considered okay. It certainly depends on the reactor type. If you have a fluidized bed reactor, they scale up differently than an externally heated reactor, and you have to take all that into account. But interestingly, and this goes along with what you were just saying, Andrea, the last couple years we've started seeing less scale up. So if somebody has a 50-ton-a-day gasifier demonstration unit operating, it used to be they'd try to build a 300 or 400 ton a day as their next step. But more and more now we're seeing either, hey, we had a 50-ton a day, we're going to build 5 of those. We know we're going to put trains, or maybe they do a very conservative scale up. Okay, we're going to do a 2x scale up and go to 100-ton a day, and we're going to build the first one, prove it out, and then stage 2 of the project is building 1 or 2 more. And that's just a result of the recent failures we've seen in this industry and people taking a more conservative approach.
Yeah. Things to think about, especially in technology choice, is where is it manufactured? If it's out of country, it might be hard to get parts. Might also be hard to get your equipment on time, and financiers look at this. So having a secure supply chain, having a good look at it, and especially if you're working with federal contracts, they look at every single piece and part of your process train. You have to provide them every nut and bolt and where it comes from. So, it's a big deal, and making sure that you have all those plans for excess equipment, especially if you're getting things out of country, becomes a really important part of your project planning.
Yeah, another piece of that is if it's, if you have multiple trains of smaller, of lower capacity, oftentimes there are technologies out there that can build that in their factory, and they can test it in their factory. So that's called a factory acceptance test. So if you're building a 250 ton a day gasifier, that's probably stick built in the field. Whereas if you're building 4 or 5 50 ton a day gasifiers, it's possible that they could be built in the factory. So you build them in the factory, you actually operate it in the factory, and by the time it gets delivered to your site, it's already been tested and operated. So you just kind of have to put the pieces back together, retest it to make sure it still works, and it's another way to reduce risk.
Yep. And we talked about the performance insurance and guarantees. Like in finance world, that's just required. You can't get around it.
And it's not cheap.
And it's not cheap. Technical due diligence. So best business practices. And this isn't new to technology development in general. Like it's kind of across the board, aerospace, whatever industry you're looking at, they really follow these best business practices. But we found them to be both important and very useful in project development as well as in the finance structures. So some of the things that we do specifically that we think are really important for companies, a gap analysis. A gap analysis just kind of helps you see like where you are today and what you need to get to that next step of where you're trying to go. And it could be whether it's on greenhouse gas emissions, it could be you're just at a part of your project and you need a gap analysis to see what things I need to optimize to get to that next step.
And real quick, with the gap analysis, it's highly dependent on where you are in the process. So if you're very early on, your gap analysis is going to evaluate far different things than if you think you're ready for financing. That gap analysis is much more involved.
Mm-hmm. Risk assessments. As we said, the risk assessment documents, it's part of your ISO 9001 documentation, but it's also, I think, one of the most useful documents that you'll have. It's very visual, it helps you move forward, it helps give you goals on what things you need to change and to attain to.
Yeah, this is, I'll get on my soapbox for a brief moment. So I've worked in a consulting manner on both. This is public. I'm allowed to share this. I worked on both the Fulcrum Bioenergy Project and the Red Rocks Bioenergy Project. And in both of those cases, when things started to go south, when things had already gone south, the first thing they did is they brought in a technical consultant to put together a risk analysis. Here are the risks, here's the ramifications, and here's potential mitigations. And in both cases, all I could think is, why are you just doing this now? How come this wasn't part of design? And so I think we're seeing a move to that. I think projects are looking at risk far earlier in the process, and that's what you need to do.
Yeah. Do you want to take the FEL and the feed studies?
Yeah, sure. So so the FEL and the feed studies are basically the engineering. So you have FEL front-end loading 1, 2, and 3. And so FEL 1 is basically a feasibility study. You kind of take publicly available information. You certainly identify feedstock and an offtake. You may have preliminary conversations with people to get indicative pricing, but it's way more than a back of a napkin, but it's kind of close to the back of the napkin in the project development process, saying, hey, does this even pencil? Should we even move forward with this? And assuming that comes out well, you move on to FELs 2 and 3. And so those are just getting more granular with your information. So FEL 2 may be a factored estimate for CapEx. You may have a MOU, a memorandum of understanding with a feedstock supplier and an off-taker. So you kind of, but you sharpen your pencil on your numbers. And as long as that looks good, again, you go to FEL 3, and again, you get more granular. Maybe you go out for bid for major equipment. Maybe you finalize your agreements. You kind of start dotting I's and crossing T's. And then after that, you move into feed, which is front-end and engineering and design. And that's when you complete engineering on the plant. You figure out all of your material offtakes. You count every nut and bolt, and you get your contracts airtight.
Yeah. And I've seen these go different ways. Like I've seen people go above and beyond on their FEL analyses and pay a lot of money for them. And my recommendation, because your goal is to get money, because you don't move forward without money. So really just kind of keep your scope narrowed down to what the financiers want to see, and build it out later if you want to from an engineering perspective, but it's kind of tunnel focused on eye on the prize. I need to do X, Y, Z, I need to put these boxes together so I can get money into the door. Because the longer that you're sitting there without money in the bank, the harder it is to actually make that project succeed.
Yeah, and we've seen people complete, $1 million FEL 3 packages in order to get financing. And most times you don't need to do that. So what we would suggest is you don't spend $1 million on the FEL 3, you spend something far less on the FEL 2, you get financing, and then the financier can help you pay for all that engineering.
Project site placement is a really important part of your due diligence, documentation, and control. The wrong site is going to ruin your project. So, we look at everything on sites from like where it is, like what's going to be impacting it, from natural disasters to economics of a region to people that are available for running your facility. And there's other things that go into site placement, but this is specifically about the site.
I was just saying, because project site placement sometimes seems to be first, in my opinion, because a lot of times it's just, strategic, it's a strategic move or whatever it is, and a lot of times we see the pushback because they're emotional decisions, they're not scientifically based. Communities, everything else. So are these in any particular order or just, no? Okay.
They're not in a particular order, but
Okay.
I can tell you what, like when I'm broadly looking at a region, what I'm looking for. I'm looking for access to the site.
Yep.
I'm looking for the zoning of the site, and if it's already been zoned for exactly what I'm looking for, because rezoning is a bear.
It is.
I am looking for rail,
Yeah.
because I really like shipping things by rail, and
Good,
rail
yeah.
works really well for me.
I agree.
I like ports. I like deep water ports. So I often look at ports, but port property can be really expensive.
Yep.
So you have to look at that. I like to look for unique opportunities like brownfield sites. Not everyone likes to do that, but you also have to worry about the rules state by state,
Yep.
because some states, you buy a brownfield site, you are responsible for the entirety of the brownfield site.
Yep.
So there's a lot of real estate choices that go into site placement. I like to look at what I have for employment around me.
Yep.
So if you go into a beautiful site, it's got everything you ever wanted, and you have no employees within 50 miles, you're totally screwed. You can't run and operate your facility.
Availability of utility as well.
Availability of utilities. I like to work with ground where I'm not having to do anything more but work with a flat site. So, hills, features, trees, they're all fairly difficult to work with,
Yep.
especially if you get into removing a ton of trees, you may run into community pushback.
Yep.
So flat industrial site that's already been in use or already has industrialized buildings that meet my requirements and my height requirements. One of the issues in this industry is we often have height requirements that are much taller than current industrial buildings. So you
Yep.
can't just go look for an industrial building and say, I'm going to go in there. You have to find ones that meet height requirements.
Yep.
Some areas actually require that you allow for the emergency services to be able to drive through your building
Yeah.
because you have explosive content. So there is a ton that goes into site placement, and each one of those, if you make a mistake, is a failure on your site.
Yeah, and especially I think the personnel is a real issue. We got a great deal on here, okay, but nobody wants to work there. And that becomes a real issue too. So, okay,
Yeah, we
thank you.
looked at a fantastic site until I realized it was next to a prison.
Free labor?
What?
Free labor. But that's a great point. Yeah, these are not in chronological orders, and project site placement is one of the first things that you look at. And the project site placement certainly is reviewed in the gap and risk analyses.
Yeah. And then in the technical due diligence, we really like creating these carbon stacks. They have value. And then audited certifications really have good guidance. So the best business practice is really thinking about doing the ISO 9001 process or similar processes. ANSI accreditation for your workers, things like that, I think are all like really good metrics to follow and it keeps you in line.
Yep.
All right. So, offtake negotiations and choices. And we made this one really simple because there's a lot of different ways it can go. But there's a lot of choices to make here. Some of them are more financeable than others. Some are easier because of delivery. One area that we see, especially on electricity, because of the time it takes to do offtake agreements with utilities, is bespoke arrangements. So this often is in data centers. We see data centers nestled up quite a lot into waste-to-energy projects. Large public corporations, those take a long time, but they are very financeable. You're always looking for something that's a AAA-rated company to do business with because you can leverage their finances for your debt financing. Smaller private corporations, way quicker, but maybe not as easy to bank. And then, of course, there's the public utilities and public-private partnerships, and they are great, and they are often very bankable, but they are not easy to accomplish.
And don't forget about your byproducts. You know, if you're making power or RNG, you certainly need an offtake for your main product. But you know, some of these technologies produce a char. Back in the days of coal gasification, there was usually a sulfur stream, and locking up your byproducts with solid contracts can certainly help project economics and financeability.
All right. Financial due diligence. So we have seen a number of really, really bad data rooms, and financiers do not like bad data rooms. So the other thing we see a lot is people will come to us and they'll say, oh yeah, we have a pro forma, and it's a project budget. They are not the same thing, not in a million years. And project budgets, often in the engineering world, that's what we do because we're submitting proposals to either our universities or to government agencies, and they want a project budget proposal. But pro formas are a very different animal. And for each of you who are in the executive roles in your companies, you have fiduciary responsibility to your company. And if you do not have a pro forma and if you do not have a good finance plan, you are at risk, because you can be sued if you do not follow your fiduciary responsibility. Everyone who runs that role runs that risk. The way I have de-risked that for myself as an executive in companies is I attach my pro forma to my operating agreement. So the reason I do that is because it gives me a good guideline on both what I'm doing in pre-development and what the expectations are in the following post-development world, and how much money is going to be spent, where it's going to be spent, and if there's any changes, you have a board vote. And it saves your butt. So if there's any advice I can give you guys as executives is to make sure that you are protected on your fiduciary responsibility and that your board has very clear expectations of how that money is going to be used, where it's going to be used, and that it is attached to your operational documentation. De-risking financial contracts. When you think about a financer and you think about banks, the main thing that should be in your head is, have I de-risked this? That's it. That's all they're looking at is what's the risk, how volatile is their money that's going out, are they going to get repaid? They want to see to be repaid in 5 years, that's pretty common. If it's longer than that, it's kind of a red light to them. Make sure all your contracts are financeable. So once again, the AAA rated companies that you're doing financing with, feedstock, offtake, incentives, real estate, all of these can be leveraged for your debt financing. Public-private partnerships and power purchase agreements. All of these are leverages for debt financing. If you have the right partners with them, they become very financeable. If you don't have the right partners, they're not. Remember, not all governments are financeable. So if you're doing work out of the country, really make sure that the government you're working with actually is financeable. And it's all public. You can Google them. It takes you 30 seconds. You can look up most companies, see where they sit financially.
Yep.
Yep. Anything more on that?
I think you covered that one pretty well.
Okay. Financial pathways and partners. It honestly is who you know. Banks and going directly to banks and cold calling banks is very difficult. I'm sure many of you guys have done that. You can call a lot of banks, and even if it's equipment financing, you may not find success. Some banks that are easier to use are local banks. So if you start doing your banking with like a local bank, they're a lot easier on the lending perspective, especially with small companies. But at the end of the day, it's who you know. I tend to use what I call introducers who are well situated in the finance world. And yes, they're going to take a small percentage of whatever you bring in, but it is money well spent because it will happen quicker than you ever could on your own. Things to think about before you talk to financiers: learn the language. If you're not speaking their language, they don't understand you. They're not technical guys. They're not in the industry space. They talk finance. So learn the language so you can talk finance with the finance guys. Know your numbers. When you talk to a financer, they're just going to know your numbers, be able to pop them up right away, even if you make yourself a cheat sheet, right? You can have a little cheat sheet in front of you. It tells you your gross margins, what your cost of goods solds are, you know, how much of the company you're willing to give up, what are you going to take in debt versus equity. Like, know those numbers because that tells them that you're financially savvy. Bank versus government versus private, they all have a different process. Banks take a while, private's really quick but more risky. They're going to ask for more of your company. A government takes a long time. You know, it's not impossible, but it takes a long time to do the government route, like 6 to 9 months process just to get the documents in, and they're, you know, each one is like a 100 to 200 page document. They're a lot of work.
They're a lot of work to put together, and they're a lot of work for the governments to review. So
Yeah.
that takes time as well.
And you have value in your projects through either your tax. A lot of people out there really want your tax incentives. They have capital gains, they need to divert them, they want it. So that is something that's of real value that all of you have because the projects you're working on all have those aspects to it. And it becomes part of your site selection too. And ETS security, so if you're doing greenhouse gas reductions, those all become part of your financial package. And if you have performance insurance, you can create securities bonds around those.
Yeah, I'll just add, when you say find a good finance partner, the last several years when government started putting forth incentives and for projects such as gasification, what we saw in our lending clients were people who had not lent to projects like that before. Maybe they're used to power projects, but they say, oh, these projects, the returns look good, maybe we should get into waste to energy. And so as a consultant, it's great because it's a lot of time. We're basically reviewing the project and educating our client at the same time. But from the borrower's perspective, it kind of, anytime you're going after money that's unfamiliar with what you're doing, it's a longer process, and there's probably a higher chance that they'll pass on it, even after going through the diligence. So if you can find a lender who's familiar with your space and knows the technologies, knows the pathways, that's a huge leg up. Because, yeah, when you say speak the language, we used to joke that we would sit and talk to our financial clients speaking one language, and then when we would talk to the project people, you're talking a whole different language. So
Yeah.
it's...
Project execution. So now you've gotten your money, and you got to do something with it. How is it going to go? We see a high degree of failure after people receive their financing.
Yeah, and I think here I believe that having a good program manager is of the utmost importance. I mean, you have the project sponsor or developer, you have the financiers, you have the contractors, and they're all largely incentivized to get the project done, but they're kind of incentivized in different ways, right? A lot of people are looking at schedule, whereas the developer should be looking at, hey, let's make sure this is built correctly. And, you know, it happens. You start building these projects and schedule starts slipping, budgets start getting overrun. And to have that program manager, to have kind of the overarching, so a program manager is kind of like an owner's engineer except for the entire project. So an owner's engineer, you know, if I'm a project developer and I hire a big engineering company to do the engineering, the owner's engineer kind of looks over my shoulder and their shoulder and says, hey, is everything going according to plan? Did you forget anything? So a program manager is that not only for the engineering, but for the schedule, for the budget, for the permits, for the contracts. And again, as these projects start slipping in schedule and budget, people get stressed out, people are in the weeds, and the people in the weeds, it's really difficult for them to see the big picture. And so that's really where the value of a program manager comes in.
Yeah, and we talked about this with Michael Long last night. So checks and balances. Being able to take a look at your company at a glance with graphs. Being able to flip through it daily and see like when you're having issues in your performance. And so that comes into having a plan on how you're going to collect that data, how you're going to manage that data, how you're going to see that data. Because as an executive, you don't have a lot of time. So you have to be able to, at a glance, see how your project is performing.
That's a great point, because the people in the weeds are being reactive because there's so much going on, but the people, the program managers can be more proactive and ideally catch things before they happen.
Yeah. Just like other industries, like aerospace, like following those processes that sound really tedious, the ISOs, different auditing, certifications, but they keep you on track. They keep safety within your facility. They keep you with best business practices. They make sure that you're managing your checks and balances. A lot of your assets, which are your greenhouse gas assets, especially if you're on the ETS marketplaces, you're required to have these certifications and audits. And so if you're not doing that, your project will start to decline in its value. Anything else?
Yep. Well, wait, I'll talk about mass balance and process integration. So this is another drum that I beat as loud as I can for process integration. I don't think enough people spend enough time thinking about this. And I'll give you two examples. So take our RNG project. So you have MSW that needs to be processed in a MRF. And so you're getting a feedstock for your gasification project from that has a spec. And let's make up numbers and say that you have a plus or minus 5% on that spec. So then that gets fed into your gasifier, which is another technology. And so your gasifier takes that spec, and it might have another plus or minus on the back of that. Then you have your shift reactor. You go out to someone like Johnson Matthey, and they design a catalyst shift reactor. They have a plus or minus 5%. And then you go to your RNG, and so that you go to Holder Topsoe, they have a plus or minus 5%. So sounds crazy, and these are made up numbers, but I've seen this before where someone says, yeah, my RNG has a plus or minus 5% spec. But if you have a plus or minus 5% going into each stage and coming out, that plus or minus 5% after 4 stages comes like plus or minus 20%. And so people don't think that through. And then from an operating standpoint is where it gets really interesting, because if you think of a perturbation in moisture in your feedstock, think of it as a blip. And in process engineering, when you have a blip, you have a control system that corrects that blip. So it kind of does like a sine wave, and a good control system will take it back to steady state. But then imagine you have that blip getting fed into those 4 successive steps. That blip can easily, without the proper process integration, that little blip that looks to be steady because of each specific control scheme can go haywire pretty quickly. And then next thing you know, you're shutting your plant down and you're taking an outage. I personally think I have not seen enough process integration. In fact, I've worked on projects where the developer doesn't even let the technology providers talk to each other. And that's one that you want to run away from really fast.
Yeah. I will just briefly go on this because we're getting close to where we'll open it up for Q&A. Job development, training, and certification. So currently right now in our industry space, there are no standard sets of ANSI accreditations, and that's some of the stuff like my team has been working on. But I do think that these are really important steps. But if you are going, say, for your ETS credits, you have to have job development training as part of your process, which is also part of the ISOs. So something to think about, being really clear on both your description of your jobs as well as the training protocols and the safety protocols for your workers. And then project management. So I think this is kind of overview of what we were talking about.
Yeah, I think what we were getting at here is after the project is up and running, it's still important to have these processes in place to make sure that the project is ultimately successful.
Yeah. One of the best, and we talked about this a little bit, one of the best tools that my father told me on project management on a large scale is to have all of your processes in graph. You look at them daily, you receive all of them, you can flip through. And if you have a daily report, not a weekly, not a monthly, but a daily, you will see exactly where your problem is in one visual flip of all of your graphs.
But you actually have to look at the daily report.
You do. Yeah. All right. So I think we're on to Q&A. The job development training and certification? Sure.
Yeah, the question is, I just had a question on this slide.
Mm-hmm.
And can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So are you guys familiar with ANSI accreditation, which is similar to ISO's, but it's the American version? Basically, like either the ISOs or ANSI, they have accreditation processes and certification for your employees. And these are a set of rules and regulations, and each industry starts putting these into place. Putting together an ANSI certification process is not for the faint of heart. It includes where you have to have subject matter experts to come through and help you put together what those are. I believe the number is 10 subject matter experts that you have to create this process. And then you come up with a set of rules and regulations and processes for that part of the process train. So each part of your process train that an employee is in charge of will have job training certification processes on each step. And this is part of keeping them safe within the workplace and making sure that all of your operational standards are across the board certified. In our industry space, there are very few ANSI accreditations already in place. So one of the steps that we've been proposing and looking at is putting together these certification processes. They're starting to come online in Europe now because there's more of these facilities, and they are required for certain certifications, like ISCC requires your job development training certification process to be outlined in your ISOs. So in all honesty, they're very boring documents to write. They're not fun to write, but they are necessary to write. And honestly, like, I think they're important. And some of the things they address, which I think are really important in our industry, is boredom. I know that sounds funny, but most of our equipment runs on its own. So how do you address boredom in the workplace? And how do you address where they are continually learning so they're not being bored and make mistakes that cause costly shutdowns and injury to your workers?
So YouTube is not
YouTube is not the answer.
Yeah, I've been hearing more and more about human factors and as far as safety goes.
Yeah. I schedule in my performas $1 million to $2 million for this. And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but it's a lot more costly to go through litigation if you have put your employees at risk. This is just a protection. It's a de-risking for yourself and your operational expenses.
Plus, when you have an incident, it affects your insurance rates for 5 years or
Yeah.
10 years.
Mhm.
And that's a cost factor too. So what's the cost to prevent that? And people don't look at that. And that's a major consideration too, because I remember having an accident, nobody's fault per se, no fine, but it affected our insurance rates for 5 years. And
Yeah.
that's pretty costly, to be honest with you. So.
Mhm.
And I think it's particularly important in an industry in its relative infancy like this one. I mean, you have, I've done a lot of work with natural gas utilities, and they have, procedures, prescriptions for safety, left, right, and center, and that's been well studied and well thought out. But here, I think it's worth putting the time and effort in.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, if I was a county and I was maybe in business development, I would want to be the center for where all this job development training happened, and I would ask the state for a grant to make that happen. So all the people in this industry space would come to my county across the United States for training in it. Just a thought.
Hypothetical.
Hypothetically, yeah. All right. So you guys have any questions for us? You've got about 15 minutes in the hot seat with us.
I'm glad Andrea's on this side, not that side.
Yeah, I noticed that we kind of not glossed over, but we look at feedstock. And feedstock, I know I'm in that area, and it's amazing how many people want MOUs, non-binding MOUs, all that stuff, which to me isn't worth the paper it's written on, but they want it, so they can bring to it. And it's really, really, really tricky, because you typically won't even get feedstock contracts for a lot of this waste, because nobody makes waste. They're not supposed to make waste. So it becomes a real song and dance when you're with investors. And I'm not sure if there's an easy answer, if there's a question there, but I just would love to hear your consideration and what your thoughts are on that when it comes to waste and everything else. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't. You couldn't get contracts from cities and everything else, the haulers. But when it comes to specific types of feedstock, it becomes really challenging. So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And early days when I was doing developments, and specifically when I was looking at plastic to energy projects, plastics on the market are on a daily thing. It's like the stock market. It goes up and everyone makes a bid on it. And it is the wild west of pricing and availability. Even people that have really steady supplies, that's pretty much kind of how the contracts work with them. So the last couple of years, I think most of the projects we've been working on are really defined feedstocks from defined sources and trying to kind of steer away from the volatility of those types of auctions. And so some of it is getting very specific about kinds of feedstocks that are available in an industrial setting where they have a problem. And so if I can suggest anything to you, it's find a major industry that has a problem and address them and secure their problem that they have to pay to get rid of. And that's a really good way. And then it gives you more flexibility on those auctions. It doesn't have to be your end all, but it should get you to a point where you have a really steady supply, and then you can start going after the auctions, getting cheaper material or material that's more defined for whatever your profile is.
Yep. And as far as the contracting itself goes, I mean, it's kind of like the levels of engineering, FEL 1, 2, 3. When you're doing your feasibility, you want to know what's out there. Hey, you have waste, would you sell it to me? Is that something you'd be interested in? Sure, let's do a non-binding MOU. And you're right, that's barely worth the paper it's written on. But as you start spending more money on the engineering and getting more granular on your capital costs and operating costs, you have to do the same thing with your contracts. You have to go, okay, let's do a binding term sheet. So here's what you're going to sell me, here's how much it's going to cost, and if you don't do it, maybe there's some damages. And then as you go to FEL 3, you want a full contract, you want it executed, you definitely want damages in there if they walk away. So you have to do the same thing on the contracting as you do with the engineering.
And preferably, if you find an industrial company that has a major problem that they have to get rid of, they're going to pay you to take care of their problem. That's preference. It becomes part of your finance stack. And that's, I think, the last 10 or so projects we've worked on together, that's been the case. And we've been working on the negotiation side of those contracts.
And if you're the first one to solve that problem, it's great. But if you're the fifth or sixth, you might not get paid.
Yeah.
Because you've created value for their product all of a sudden. Yeah.
I want to talk about incentives really quick and how that you fold those incentives into the capital stack when a lot of those incentives are tax credits. Mm-hmm. And so they come in later on after one day you make money. That's one thing. And then pertaining to workforce, are you familiar with the Employment Training Panel in California?
What is it?
Employment Training Panel, ETP? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's a great program. It's very difficult for a business to apply. We have what's called a multiple employer contracts. We actually apply for the companies. And so then it goes back to that training because they have to develop their training program. Yeah. And that's kind of why I was asking that question earlier.
Yeah, so there are a number of services out there that do what's called site development, site placement, and really what they're talking about is incentives. It's not actually on the site itself. It's looking at the incentives that whatever state is providing them. They are ridiculously expensive to use. So working with your development officers in each of the counties is your best and highest priority, especially to save on costs and so you're not paying more later. But all of the incentives are there for a reason. But you have to be really cautious. Like you can't go into a site and like if you're trying to do business in a state, you have to really be careful of what's called a but-for. So if you get your site already located and you've secured it, and now you try to go after incentives at the state level that you're going to bring business to their state, you've lost it because you lost your but for. So their job is to incentivize you to come and do big business in the state. And it usually includes things like, how many full-time employees are you having? What kind of economics are you going to bring to the region? How are you going to benefit that region? And when you can provide them those good packages, then they have incentives for you. On the other side, which is the federal tax incentive side, a lot of those, you're correct, don't come into place until after your equipment is in operation. But they each have different ones. So there's R&D tax credits, there's opportunity zones, there's the Energy Community Census Tract, there is all of the various ones associated with your operations of your equipment and the timing of the equipment coming in. But if you get the right tax equity investor as a partner, then you can time some of that so some of that money can come in at different times, and so you're not completely dependent on operation coming into place.
Not to bring it back to financials, always, but about the fiduciary, I often, when I work with clients, notice that they don't know that when they sign financial documents, and we're talking about bigger clients, when even if you're not public, you're private, you can have jail time and you can face things if you don't understand the financials you are signing and what they mean. They come with parts of the package where you're agreeing that you do all your risk assessment and you're following these rules, and if you don't follow them, you can be put in jail for it. With that, is there something simple that different principals, because everyone plays a different role in their executive, and with the pro forma, for you, you like set it up already, what you're responsible. Is there an easier way for principals to find out what they're responsible for? Because sometimes they might just be CFO or CEO and not know that they're required to sign the financials, and that means they're taking responsibility for it.
All C-suite executives can be sued, period. So, like, if you take on a C-suite executive job, it has responsibility attached to it, and you can be responsible for that company, and you can be sued for the problems of that company as a C-suite executive. You, especially as entrepreneurs, it's not something we think about very often because we think everything's going to be roses, but these things do happen. You have conflicts with people you have contracts with. They can come back to you, not just as the company, but you personally.
Yeah.
So you have personal responsibility. And so you're correct, keeping very good records, making sure that your board is on track and everyone understands what their roles and responsibilities are, and they're all on the same page of how the company is going to be operated. It's really important.
I also think you can request insurance as a C-suite and a board member. You should. I mean, that's just mandatory. If you're going to get a board position, you should ask to be insured for that.
Yep.
And even as a C-suite executive, that should be a part of your contract. It should just be.
It is, and I put it into all of my operating agreements on purpose. So I don't sign a company unless I'm going to have that insurance available.
So one thing that you had mentioned was, just calling around to banks and stuff to try to find financing is quite tough. You had mentioned finding someone that can introduce you. Let's say we get this question a lot as, machinery distributors from our clients. Do you do in-house financing, or can you help me find financing? So if you were to give advice to a new entrepreneur that's trying to create one of these projects, rather than just calling banks, what would you advise to actually start building those relationships? I know I have to build them, but how do I even go about that in the first place?
Once again, it's who you know. It took me a decade to find the right finance partners. So it's not like, if you work, and I'm not trying to toot our horn, but if you work with people who've been doing this a long time, like Scott and I, we know who to go to. And we know what you need to have together to go to those people so you're not rejected. But it literally took a decade of work to find the right partners. And you guys know this, I'm not an unfriendly person. I'm pretty personable. I network really well. I have a huge network of people. It still took me a decade.
Yeah, I've been working with lenders in this industry since 2000. So, and I still, the lenders I met in 2000, 2002, I still work with today.
Yeah.
All right. I don't see any more hands. So
I think we're good.
Thank you you got one? All right.
For your contacts and the lenders, on the list of places to go to invest money, where does municipal solid waste fall?
I work with industry-specific lenders, so they understand this industry, and anything to deal with waste they're quite involved in. Surprisingly, they kind of span, because a lot of them are also oil and gas. So it's kind of a combination of like the people who are traditional institutional lenders in the oil and gas space are also in the waste to energy or in the municipal solid waste space. So.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you. Great. I really enjoyed this session. Very, very informative. We're going to break. Go see the sponsors before they break their booths down. We'll reconvene back here. Again, the last session is going to be extremely informal. If you can stick around, great. We won't be long, and we'll get everybody back home and on the road. So we're at break. Thank you.